Brian Pang and Hudson Liao of Asians Are Strong for coordinating the national live stream.
We have just come and we are so grateful for the Georgia AAPI Legislative Conference, who just delivered an impactful press conference earlier this morning at the Georgia State Capitol. Since last year, in November 2022, we elected a record number of 11 AAPI members to the Georgia General Assembly, the largest number of AAPI serving in a state legislature in the continental United States. I'm going to repeat, 11 AAPI members in the Georgia General Assembly, making us the largest number of AAPI serving in state legislature in the continental United States. This is nearly triple the number of AAPIs elected since last year. We begin our rally with a procession of our banners, which you'll see in just a moment. These banners are carried by our March Remembrance Coalition and South Smith, Pam T. Ashling, Executive Director of the Asian American Action Fund, Georgia Chapter, Michelle Tom, Secretary General of the Korean American, Sarah Park, President of the Korean American Coalition of Atlanta, Pepija Rizal, activist within the Bhutanese community, March 16th, family members, and joined by many of the other community members. We recognize the second anniversary of March 16th, and our attendees who attended the press conference have walked over from the Capitol, and they are ready to arrive. So please welcome our processional.
Thank you so much to our procession leaders, and if everybody would be able to take a seat, we can begin our program. To begin our rally today, we will recite the names of the 9 Atlanta shooting victims and lone survivor. Soon Jung Park, age 74. Sun Jung Kim, age 51. Suja Kim, age 69. Young Yu, age 63. Delana Ashley Yon Gonzalez, age 33.
Paul Andre Michael, age 54. Xiao Jie Kang, age 49. Dayo age 44. Alcias Hernandez Ortiz, age 30, survivor of March 16th shooting. And now, let us observe a moment of silence for the lives lost in Atlanta 2 years ago today, March 16th, as well as those who lost this year, to mass shooting, gun violence in Monterey Park and Capitol Bay, and at many of the other mass shooting locations. We send healing and prayers and support for the families and the survivors, and some of whom are present here today. So let us take a minute of silence. Thank you. And to the families, we are with you. And to the members that are lost, we will remember you. And we hope that we find justice and peace in the community that has been impacted. Frank Korematsu, the original Asian American civil rights activist, fought to overturn the wrongful incarceration and conviction of Japanese Americans. In Fred's words, if you have a feeling that something is wrong, don't be afraid to speak up. Today, we are doing just that. We are speaking up, we are speaking out, and we are no longer just standing in the shadow of the Georgia Capitol. We are inside the Capitol, and we are speaking truth to power.
Now we would like to welcome to the stage Katie Vu to kick us off. Katie is an integral part of our Atlanta AAPI activist and artist community. A truly unique storyteller, she and her family came to the United States as Vietnamese immigrant refugees. Katie grew up in rural Georgia, while her parents eked out a living as chicken farmers. You can only imagine the alienation and isolation as an Asian teenager growing up in the Deep South. She found her voice in poetry. In her own words, she became that weird poet girl who wanted to be a rapper. It was only when Katie began attending the University of Georgia that she discovered her voice as a spoken word artist. She performed and won first place in a competition, winning a $1,000 prize. She began performing every weekend, traveling to colleges in various states, and since then she has evolved into a recognized content creator, videographer, and brand manager. She has also created incredible content to improve voter accessibility and civic engagement among AAPI voters. Last year, she worked closely with the Asian American Advocacy Fund to produce a groundbreaking coloring book, The ABCs of AAPIs, for which she was interviewed on national TV. The artwork was famously installed as a 150-foot mural display on the Atlanta Beltline. We give you Katie Vu.
Hi. Good morning. Thanks for being here today. Is everyone here familiar with spoken word poetry? Anyone not familiar? Okay. But just in case, I am a daughter of immigrants, so I need affirmation at all times. So if you feel what I'm saying, give me a little snap. You could do a little better than that. You got it. Yeah. Okay. So throughout my performance, if you just feel called to give me a little snap. It helps. This is called Make America Great Again. Cheney Elementary School, Civic Oration Contest, 2002. The prompt: what makes the USA great? Mom said talk about how it makes way for people like us with a place to stay. But by 5th grade, I was already jaded by the images of Vietnam that my textbooks painted. So corrupt, so deceitful as a people. Had other kids tell me I was intrinsically evil. And my teachers worried that I would isolate them, that telling the immigrant story would affect my grade, because after all, this is a contest. If the judges can't relate, then they won't be responsive. Here I highlighted some parts for you to shorten, and I whited out some things that I don't think are important, because they don't even fit our definition of boring. Funny thing is, I didn't think twice about it. She was a real American. Who was I to doubt it? And I kept believing them. And it didn't feel crazy then. Funny how it keeps you grounded when they label you an alien. Because that's what we do. We
immigrants. We don't really talk much. We just keep listening. And I would take it in because I was new and I was still learning until I realized those books would never reflect my journey. If class lessons are biased, then yes, united we stand, but we are just standing still. If we don't have a plan to tell our story, then no one else will. But Mom said, honey, don't get involved in all of this. We're lucky enough to be here. It doesn't really matter what they call us. No, I care what they call us. She would clean bathrooms day and night just to put us through college. But she said, it's okay. I've been through much worse. They're just words, honey. They don't really hurt. Like her first job, first day in the States, no clue how to make an American hamburger. Customers spit on it right in front of her. She was cussed out by the manager because she didn't know the difference between mayonnaise and mustard. Maybe something about mixing the yellow and white confused her. But that didn't upset her. She kept going knowing the best country in the world would eventually accept her. And now 12 years later, all her kids graduated. She took the test, took the oath, flag waving, Ma, we made it. We can talk politics and you don't have to be afraid. And then she was pulled over because she wasn't the right shade. In South Georgia, in a town with population 500, where everybody owns a gun but police do the most hunting. Despite her knowledge of the law, she told herself, stay quiet. What do you do when the one thing you depend on is biased? What do you do when you've made this country yours? You raise your kids with the intention of moving this country forward. Because this country is all they've ever known. And after 24 years, you finally thought you could call this country home. Because in this new life, you are so much more than a voiceless housewife. You can speak your mind, and they promised that it would matter. They said, just keep working harder. The rewards will come after. Just so long as you remember to always pay your taxes. Keep your head down. Make do and be a product of your environment. Then you turn on the news. They say people like you brought the virus. We love your cultures, but can you keep the space tidier? We love your cuisines, but can you elevate the taste higher? We love your art, but can you make the face lighter? You know, I love America, but can I call you a liar? But I thank you for this fire to become an artist and a writer, to keep screaming our stories no matter how small they feel. Because our stories must be told for us to be whole and complex and real. So let us take up more space than they gave us to exist in. That we are not just the girlfriend and the best friend who listens. We are not just the cleaners and spas that we work in. And our cleaners and spas don't make us any less than. We are mothers and sisters and daughters and much more. We are much more than your visit to Chinatown will ever see. But by the way, we don't want your pity. We want community, to be seen as beings with our own backstories. So for now, back down. We will write what's missing. For once, cast yourself as the best friend who listens. Dear Cheney Elementary, I may be 15 years too late, but isolation is not a weapon. Immigrants should never be threatened. If you don't understand acceptance, you have no idea what makes this country great. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Katie. Now, before we hear from the White House, I wanted to properly introduce my co-MC, Victoria Nguyen. Last year, Victoria was appointed as a commissioner to the newly reconstituted White House Initiative on Asian Americans, Native Hawaiians, and Pacific Islanders, known as WIANPI. She is a champion for equitable language access and cultural competency, encourages civic engagement, protects immigrant rights, and develops vital social service programs. And she recently founded the Georgia AAPI Hub.
Thank you so much, Bonnie, and I'm so honored to be in community with everyone. Especially honored to have the President of the White House here with us. Today we are honored to have Erica Moore-Sugu. She's a Deputy Assistant to the President and AAPI Senior Liaison. And with her, we also have Hannah Kim, who's here to join us as well. And at the White House, Erica supports the administration on a wide array of the President's priorities, engages with the AA and NHPI communities and leaders on important issues such as advancing safety, justice, inclusion, and opportunity through a whole government approach to racial justice. And we are so honored that we have someone like Erica at the White House from our community to really advance the policies, the work for our Asian American community. And I'm especially proud to know that she accompanied President Biden to Monterey Park just a few days ago. While we were in DC, we got to watch the President make his remarks and join the Asian American community there. And it is such an incredible experience to know that the White House cares about our communities, and we have the presence of the White House and individuals like Erica here with us today. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce the incredible champion, Erica Moore-Sugu.
Thank you so much, Bonnie and Victoria, Madam Commissioner, friends, and also Elizabeth's mama, probably the most important thing. Thank you for the introduction. It's an honor to share this space with you again in this room. I was here 12 months ago to this day, and it was 2 years ago on an early spring day, like today, even though it wasn't freezing in the morning like it was, but now it's a spring day again. A gunman went on a raid spas in this beautiful Atlanta region. It's a horrific act of hatred claimed the lives of 8 innocent people, including 6 women of Asian descent. On that fateful day, hopes and dreams were shattered and lives were cut short. Many of you, like Robert and Michael, who are here with us today, lost your precious mothers, wives, sisters, friends, and neighbors. I know that our community will never be the same. The President and the First Lady know all too well the lingering pain of losing a loved one. They send their deepest condolences as they recognize the burden of your loss, trauma, and grief, and they want you to know you are not forgotten. I was humbled to be here last year on behalf of the President. I'm honored to be here again to convey his message to all those gathered today in person, but also virtually. From my hometown in Hawaii to San Francisco to New York City and everywhere in between, spanning all ages, faiths, ethnic and racial backgrounds, in solidarity, to grieve and pray together, to stand up against anti-Asian hate, discrimination, xenophobia, racism, gender-based violence, and the plague of senseless gun violence. I'm here to let you know that you are not alone. It is now my honor to present to you a message from the President of the United States. There it is. It's dated today. And he says, 2 years ago today, 8 innocent people, mothers, sisters, aunts, friends, and neighbors were gone in an instant. Families had to bury a piece of their soul. This community across Atlanta was devastated, but not broken. On this day of remembrance, Jill and I keep you and your loved ones in our hearts. To the families of the victims. Though the grieving never truly ends, we hope you find purpose in what will never be lost. the love you had for them and the love they had for each of you. And to the entire community, as Vice President Harris and I shared with you during our visit to Atlanta shortly after the darkness, I want you to know that the entire nation remains with you. Across this country, people of all backgrounds have gathered to remember the lives lost, honor this community's extraordinary resilience, and stand in solidarity with our fellow Americans. I want you to know that I see you. My administration sees you. And we are determined to end the scourge of gun violence, anti-Asian hate, and all forms of racism and extremism in this nation. We remain determined in the belief that out of solace there is strength. From fear there is hope. And from darkness comes light. Let us remember who we are. We are the United States of America. And there is nothing beyond our capacity when we work together. May God bless the 8 souls we lost, but who will always be with us. And may God bless all of you. This is signed Joe Biden. Again, on behalf of the President, I applaud and thank you for rallying for justice. This community has inspired the nation with your courage and resiliency. You are doing the hard work to transcend tragedy and serve as a beacon of hope in the face of hate and adversity. The President will continue to fight alongside you to protect our families and communities. In addition to signing the COVID-19 Hate Crimes Act to combat anti-Asian hate and hate incidents, President Biden has taken more executive action over the past 2 years to reduce gun violence than any other president at this point in their presidency. This includes signing the Bipartisan Safer Communities Act, the most significant gun violence reduction law in almost 3 decades. And on Tuesday, as Victoria mentioned, I was with him in Monterey Park, California, where he also took historic action to further reduce gun violence and save lives. And he's counting on you to keep up the good fight for what is right. May your love for another serve as a source of strength and courage to unite and keep starting good trouble, as our beloved Congressman John Lewis would say, because only light can drive out darkness. Only love can drive out hate. Mahalo nui loa.
Thank you so much, Erica. And I see there are a few people who would like to come in. Why don't you please come in and take a seat? We have room on the tables on the far side. I appreciate you coming in to join us for our rally. Thank you, President Joe Biden. Thank you, Erica and the White House. And now we are grateful to have 2 of the March 16th family members with us. Dr. Robert Peterson has a PhD in medical sociology and is a past professor of Morehouse College. He is the youngest son of young A.U., who was killed at the aromatherapy spa in Buckhead. In the aftermath of the shootings, Robert has now himself become a subject matter expert on gender and race and is a crime victim advocate. We had a chance to hear Robert speak earlier this past weekend at a memorial tree planting ceremony in honor of the March 16 victims. He shared that he grew up living in 2 worlds, both Black and Korean, and he provided his unique insight living in dual cultures. He is eloquent, extremely articulate, and makes a compelling case for building a multiracial and multi-generational coalition to combat hate. Welcome, Dr. Robert Peterson.
Thank you all again for joining us today. Like I said, I'm Robert Peterson, the youngest son of young AU. On a day like this, I think about my mother, but I also think about my older brother, Elliot. As many Koreans know, he's my mom's favorite. He's the oldest. He's more like her. He's private and often less likely to show his emotions. As you see, we're not alike. But I also would like to share my condolences with the other victims' families. I know your struggle and grief. I know the difficulty of today and of every day. 2 years later, and our pain has only deepened, our heartache and sorrow palpable, but it has also strengthened our resolve and our commitment to service. The violence and hate Asian Americans face is real, and it continues to endanger our community. Again, my mother was robbed of her voice, of her liberty, and her life at 63. She was taken through violent expressions of hate and gun violence. Again, when a family member dies in public mass shootings, our family lose privacy to grieve alone. But we are wrapped today in your comfort in grieving together as a community. You know, before today, I prayed for confidence and inspiration to give to you today. But I often find that difficult when I myself feel hopeless, lonely, and powerless. But my mother came to me in a dream for the very first time recently. And it's not like you imagined, where you would recognize she's no longer here and you tell all the great things, but it was a very normal dream, and I'll share with you. We were at the casino. It was her, me, and my brother, and she was winning big playing poker. That was the game that I was teaching her how to play before she died. And she was showing me all her poker chips, and she was winning. So she said it was time for a dinner break. So, of course, I was excited, thinking we're going to eat at one of the hotel restaurants and have a great steak dinner. But I was surprised, not really, that she had already prepared dinner. It was a fresh bowl of ramen noodles, cooked with the boiling hot water from the hotel coffee pot. I remember complaining, and then I walked out and went to go look for other options. And it was then that I woke up. And I realized then it was a dream. I remember rushing back into my bed, laying down for 2 hours, trying to dream again. I was looking for her to say I'm sorry and I love her. But I couldn't go back to sleep. I couldn't dream, and I couldn't see her smiling again. I share that with you because I was like, what does that mean? That's not what I asked for. But first, I realized she was letting me know she is gone, that she was having fun, and she's okay. Mom will be pleased that I'm not alone, that I'm gathered here to collectively remember the lives lost, to share our stories nationwide, and that her story and legacy has brought us together. Rather than being outraged and consumed by rage, sadness, and feelings of defeat, she would want us to find happiness again. She would want us to continue living, to use her story to empower and uplift our people and the world. And that's why I'm committed. I'm committed to dedicating my living life to service of others, to those in our community to live selflessly by being connected across cultures and building a life forward with purpose. So I imagine today is the time to reimagine and redefine our narrative of who we are and what we stand for. Now is the time to come together as a community to grieve and to heal, but also to demonstrate our strength and our resilience. She would ask that we unite, that we reach across cultural aisles and stand in unison against hate, to demand safety and justice for our community and advocate for systemic changes from our leaders. We can reimagine and redefine what it means to be Asian in America. We can no longer be defined only as fresh off the boat as new immigrants, but rather ingrained and essential to the larger community and a big part of the American story. So I remember today to take it as an opportunity to recognize that despite our differences, despite our different experiences with racism, that we have a shared history of oppression and silence, but we have one of resilience and strength as well. that we share a similar goal of living free of bigotry and hate, that we all, like my mother, we just want to work. We want to go to the grocery store, the dance hall, ride the train, attend concerts, and go to school and be within our own communities. But we want to do it safely, free of violence and hate. We can reimagine and redefine what they perceive about our communities, counter that narrative that we don't get along or continuously be used as scapegoats, but realize that we have a shared history of collaboration and change that narrative. We can create a narrative of a new minority, new model minority, a model of minority communities in partnerships, a community coming together in strength, building in our shared history, our shared responsibility to our ancestors, our elders, and our children. I recognize today not only as the worst day of my life, but now as an opportunity to reimagine what a multiracial coalition looks like. That we are no longer struggling apart, but we are working and standing together in solidarity against injustices for all people. Her memory and the lives lost that day are always with us. She is now our ancestor. We must remember her life and the others and keep fighting, keep living, and now it's time for us to finish the job that she prepared us for. So I say to you, as we gather to mourn and remember that we are together, and ultimately history shows that we are stronger when we stand and collectively fight injustices together. I love you, Mama, and I now do this and work for you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Robert, for sharing your heartbreak and pain, but also your hope for the future. Michael Webb is a successful businessman and contractor, and he now lives in Florida. He is the former husband of Xiaojia Tan, and they share a daughter. He first met his wife while traveling for work in China in the early 2000s. Michael met Xiaojia in the southern Chinese city of Nanning. Neither spoke each other's language well, but that didn't stop the pair from falling in love. The couple was married in 2004, and although they ended up splitting up in 2012, they maintained a close and cordial relationship, especially for their daughter. Michael helped to remodel Xiaojia's spa business, Young's Asian Massage, during the pandemic. He recalled, she'd always say, "We family." Even when we get divorced, she'd say that, because that's how she was. Mike spoke powerfully this morning, advocating for gun safety at the Georgia Capitol. We'd like to welcome Michael Webb.
Friends, for the past 2 years, my glasses. For the past 2 years, I've talked about the unspeakable trauma that my daughter Jamie and our family have had to live through since her mother, Xiaojia Tan, was brutally executed on 3/16. While we still grieve, I must tell you that our grief has turned into frustration and anger. So I'm going to change the narrative. I must admit I'm taking it personal now. So a little about my family. Most of you know my youngest daughter Jamie's from China. What you probably don't know is I helped raise 2 daughters of Asian descent. Lauren lives in California. My son, Jason, and his wife Jennifer, and my 4 grandsons live in Colorado. Until recently, Jennifer was a school teacher. We lost Jared in 1999 when he committed suicide with a shotgun that was kept unlocked and loaded in his grandparents' living room. he was 18 years old. I used to worry more about my daughter's safety than my son's because they're women. But now I must worry more about their safety because they are Asian women. My former wife and 7 other innocent people, most of them Asian women, were hunted down and killed by a 21-year-old boy that the state of Georgia allowed to walk into a gun store and walk out with a semi-automatic weapon in less than an hour. They were all dead 2 hours later. A simple 3-day cooling off period like we have in Florida and many other states would have probably saved all their lives. It's simple, folks. The more guns there are, the more gun deaths there are, and there are more guns in the United States than anywhere else on earth. In the mid-60s, our country had a public health crisis, 5 years of skyrocketing motor vehicle-related deaths. So in 1966, the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration was created. The vote in Congress, 318 to 3. There was no partisanship. We set and administered new safety standards for vehicles and road traffic safety. We created laws, regulations, licensing, and testing, among hundreds of other initiatives. The result? We now have 15% less deaths on the highway than we did in 1966, even though we have 4 times as many vehicles on the road. I submit to you that now guns have caused a public health crisis. For God's sake, they're killing all our children. But we already have a model to make it better. And guess what? We don't have to take the guns away any more than we had to take the vehicles away in 1966. So to the vocal minority, stop hyperventilating about some diabolical plan to take your guns. It's just paranoia. As I mentioned, my daughter-in-law, Jennifer, until recently was a school teacher. She's the best mother my 4 grandchildren could ever have. She wrote to me recently, and I quote, "Our babies should not have to learn to run and hide from an active shooter as part of their education in school. These are our babies. What the hell is the matter with us?" Thank you.
If we could have our audience members come in, we have some tables in the back. And I also happen to see among the people who just entered is Amanda Pongwa, who's the artist, multimedia, multidisciplinary artist who created this beautiful work behind us. She came in all the way from New York, but she is a child of Georgia. She grew up here. And so, just to repeat, the theme of our event is always this. Asian Americans rise against hate. So, now we're going to go on to our community activists.
Thank you so much, and our hearts are with you, Robert and Michael, and the families that are watching through the live feed nationally. Just this week, the FBI released new hate crime statistics. They are horrifying, triggering, and angry. Over a third of Asian Americans said they made changes in their daily schedule or routine over the previous year due to worrying about being threatened or attacked. Only 19% of them believe their local elected leaders were doing a very or somewhat good job dealing with violence against Asian Americans. Last year, on the 1-year anniversary of the Atlanta shootings, a survey conducted by AAPI data found that 16% of Asian Americans, 14% of Native Hawaiians and Pacific Islander adults had experienced a hate crime since the beginning of 2021. 14% and 16%. Proportions suggesting that nearly 3 million Asian American Pacific Islander adults have experienced a hate incident within about a year. 3 million. Let that sit in. And with these sombering statistics, we wanted to now introduce to you our API community leaders and activists who were working day in and day out in their respective networks and communities to share their insights, their stories, the work that they've been doing in this community to fight and to combat Asian hate. So first, I would like to introduce Dr. Sohan An. She's a multi-award-winning academic and professor of social studies education at Kennesaw State University. And she is definitely not new to this space. She's a curriculum scholar. She focuses on K-12 Asian American studies and creating anti-racist social studies curriculum. She is actively involved in teacher professional development and curriculum, writing for teaching Asian American histories in K-12 schools in Georgia and in other states. And among many other accolades, she is recognized with the Distinguished Research Award from the American Educational Research Association on the education of Asian Pacific Americans. So now I invite Dr. An to share her remarks and the work that she's been doing.
Thank you so much for joining us today. It's a blessing to be here with you all for collective grieving and healing. Like many of us in this room, I was beyond horrified to hear the news of Atlanta's shooting on that day. Although I was devastated, I wasn't surprised because since the beginning of the pandemic, I've seen one case after another where Asian Americans were blamed for COVID-19 pandemic. As a history education scholar, I know this is not the first time when Asian Americans were blamed for public health crisis. Back in the day, 1880s, Chinese immigrants were bullied, Chinese immigrants were harassed and killed because of the bubonic plague. And it continues. And also, this is not the first time history shows that people of color in general, the new immigrants in general, were blamed for disease outbreak, various disease outbreak. So I wasn't surprised, but I was frustrated to see this ugly history repeats on the day 2 years ago. As an education scholar, I can say that poor education is the problem. That means good education is the solution. If we really want to stop anti-Asian hate and violence, we cannot continue to exclude and misrepresent Asian Americans in our school curriculum. So recently, from my anger after the Atlanta shooting, I embarked on new research. So I collected all 50 states K-12 U.S. history curriculum standard and analyzed with my research question what we as a nation are teaching about Asian Americans to our nation's children. One of the findings, as you might guess, among the 50 states, 18 states has 0 Asian American history content. Most of the states include just 1 or 2 events, typically the Japanese American incarceration during World War II and the Chinese Exclusion Act of 1882. As you might know, right, these 2 events barely covers the diversity, complexity, and the richness of Asian Americans in U.S. history. Furthermore, these 2 events actually send the wrong message to our nation's children that Asian Americans are either the victim of Asian Americans actually the victim of the Native racism, or the Asian Americans are the enemy of the state. So I'm wondering, what if what if our school, particularly in Georgia, have taught the long history of Asian migration to this nation, Asian Americans' long struggle of racism and white supremacy, and also Asian Americans' contribution to our racial justice. If then, maybe, just maybe, then 21-year-old white man Aaron Law might not have committed this tragic murder because he must have learned about the humanity of Asian immigrant women through his education in Georgia public school. Indeed, what we teach at school really matters. It's not an academic debate, it's a life and death issue. If our school curriculum teach Asian American history as well as the history of indigenous, Black, and other marginalized groups, our children will grow up with a better understanding of what it means to be American and who belongs to this country. It is truly inspiring that many states, including Illinois, New Jersey, and Connecticut, are now mandating teaching Asian American history in their K-12 public school. And also nationwide, many states are actually now requiring ethnic studies as a high school graduation requirement. More inspiring is that actually these changes could come about because of students of color, community of color, people of color have been demanding what they deserve from their public school. I'm part of AAPI, Asian American Voices for Education. We are Asian American grassroots group right here in Georgia, fighting for the inclusive history education in all Georgia public schools. We do what we do. We do what we do because we truly believe the power of education. And also, we know we cannot do this alone because Asian American history is a part of the larger civil rights and human rights struggle by the indigenous, Black, brown, and other marginalized community. So let's fight together to bring a radically different future for all children. Because until everyone is free, no one is free.
Thank you so much, Dr. Ryan. She's such a phenomenal researcher, community advocate in this space. And thank you so much for taking the time to join us this morning. And now I'd like to present my dear friend and renowned community leader, Aparna Bhattacharya. And I think back to March 16th when the news was coming in, and March 17th, Asian American Advanced Justice, our partners, gathered the community on an 8 a.m. call March 17th. As we were overwhelmed, I could hear voices of Aparna, my big sis, right? Making sure that we were grounded, we were taken care of as we gear up for this fight for justice for the family members lost on March 16th. Aparna is an executive director of the Georgia nonprofit organization Raksha. And since 1988, she has been an advocate fighting for crime victimization and gender-based violence in immigrant communities and providing training on needs of underserved communities. She is an experienced national and statewide trainer on cultural competency, language access, collaboration, and meeting the intersectional needs of immigrants and refugee survivors. And in 2013, Aparna was named a White House Champion of Change. And among many accolades, she was listed in the 15 most influential leaders in the 2023 Atlanta 500 list by Atlanta magazine. So now I invite Aparna to share her remarks and the work that she's been doing.
Thank you, Victoria. Thank you for the leadership. Thank you for having me here. What a gift it is to be with you on a day where our hearts are hurting and we are missing the wonderful individuals that are part of our lives, and we're learning about these individuals from their family members. We get to know them and they live on in our hearts because of their family members that continue to be with us. So I'm sending love and light to all of you because I know it's an emotional day. But I'm also here to remind you that as we do the work in addressing Asian hate, that we always look at intersectionalities, that we cross-connect against, among our communities. We cannot ignore that this act of violence was linked to violence against women, gender-based violence, and that is something that we have to intersect and think about every day. So as we're fighting to make sure anti-Asian hate is not happening, are we supporting stalking laws? Are we working for confidentiality for survivors so that their addresses aren't given away? Are we working to make sure that we are getting information and resources in our languages and in a way that meets our literacy needs? I was hoping that the changes that I would see with that, like, we would have things in our language so we would know the resources, so we could access housing resources, not just law enforcement, right? But that we could get social services. So as you're providing rent assistance for survivors, how do you know about it? Oh, well, we have all this in all these languages. You go into that portal and it's not in our languages. We get this false rhetoric of people meeting our needs and showing up for their communities, and they're not. We all should have access to shelter. We should all have access to safety. We should have access to courts. And we should not have to go through extra hoops just because we don't speak English. And that is the barrier that we face every day. You can pass that law. We've got a federal law that says we have access to interpreters. But how are we holding our law enforcement agencies, our social service agencies, our counties accountable to making sure they are meeting the language needs of our community? Because we can't access resources if we don't know they exist. So we have to be interconnected, and we have to fight for the dignity of every individual in our community. As we speak, there are laws that are impacting trans youth in our community. And the dignity of someone just based on how they identify, what their race is, we need to fight for the dignity of every one of them. And so we have to work across our communities and know the dignity of each and every one of us. I hate that these community members who are the trolls and all that feel like we're expendable, that we're not important enough. And they can troll and leave horrible voice messages saying things like, oh, why do you care more about whatever you want to call our communities, right? And the women in our communities. The reality is we are valuable, we are precious. Our lives are valuable and just as valuable as yours. And so please create pathways, take those barriers away as opposed to giving us lip service. Part of our work has been fighting for language access. You can pass that law. Our state has a lovely language access guide that helps you identify a language. Now let's put the dollars behind making sure those interpreters are there. There's already training happening. So pass the laws, great. But where are you holding communities accountable? Where are you making sure it's happening? Because the laws are there already. I want to leave you in saying, let's continue to be active in our communities. Let's continue to look at intersectionalities. But I want to leave you with the words of my friend Deepa Iyer. She just wrote a book on social movements. And this has been an emotional week for us. We're telling stories, we're remembering, we're grieving, and it's painful. And yet we still show up in community, and we're all crying, we're all hurting, right? And we still show up. And I think this quote in her book kind of helped me sit through it. Why do we continue to show up? Especially when the powers that be and the systems disappoint us. Our belief in the promise of social change through connections with another is why we keep trying after feeling disappointment. Why we keep returning after grieving. Why we keep fighting after resting. Is why we keep building after systems fail, over and over again, I'm adding that in. Why we keep loving even when we are experiencing heartbreak. It's why we take actions that embody solidarity, resistance, and hope. It's why we infuse our efforts with joy, passion, affirmation, and healing. We intuitively know that something better is blooming, growing, emerging, and we want to be part of that momentum, that stream, and that journey. I thank you for being the community with which I heal in. And I hope that we continue to bring each other healing through very, very tough moments. Thank you.
Thank you, Aparna. You know, March 16th impacted multi-generations. We saw images of Asian American elders being attacked senselessly. And we saw members of the youth stand up to rise and speak up against Asian hate. Anybody who is anyone in the first generation Korean community knows our next speaker, Kuk-ja Lee. She has lived in Atlanta for over 50 years. She has worked tirelessly as a volunteer, officer, and community leader within the Korean American Association of Greater Atlanta. She is also a well-known business owner, longtime entrepreneur, and philanthropist. We are incredibly lucky to have her, and she's so brave to appear. She speaks on behalf of our elder generation. Kuk-ja Lee.
Thank you for giving me this chance to speak today. I'm Kuk-ja Lee, and I have lived and worked in Atlanta since 1971. I was asked to speak today to be the voice of a Korean elder who has lived, worked, and volunteered in the Korean community of Atlanta over the 50 years. I guess people now call me an elder, though I don't always feel that way, and I heard. I have volunteered tirelessly with the Korean Association of Greater Atlanta in many positions, including as a past officer. I first immigrated to USA in 1969. When I came to Atlanta, I began my career as a registered nurse at the Emory and Northside Hospital. My first job in America was healing others. I served as a nurse for over 15 years. I eventually left the nursing, and my second career was to become a business owner. Over the year, my family and I studied and ran for plant nursery, landscaping, hardware store, flower shop, and now I handle funeral services, which is the way is returned my first job. You see, this is also rural that care for and heal others in their times of greatest grief and sorrow. On March 16, 2021, when our community heard that a gunman shot or killed 8 people, including 6 Asian women. The charge was news spread through the work community instantly. Sorry. It caused great fear, anxiety, anger, and sadness. What hurt especially was when we heard it as the law enforcement officer say that is not a hate crime. That to me was impossible to believe it. That man drove 45 minutes all the way from Cherokee County to the Boca Atlanta. He didn't target just any spot. There was many spots that the European or run by other communities. No, he especially targeted Asian owner businessmen. And he killed those Korean and Chinese women. women who looks like me. He killed them because of who they were. Asian women working such a vulnerable job. As we learn over the time, then many of those women who died were middle-aged and elderly. Two of them were only 50, two were in their 60s. And the eldest one, Sun Young Park, was 74, just like me. I'm a little over than 74. I had the very sad task of helping some of the multi-system family volunteer their funeral services. It really hit so hard because those of come to the family as best we could. But here we are, 2 years later, and we are still grieving, and it is still painful. The virus really impacted our community. Also, I saw how many friends and other elderly Asian community members which and were affected. Not only in Atlanta, but we saw in the news every day so many stories of Asian elders being attacked, injured, and hurt. We Asians were unfortunately blaming and the target during the pandemic because people say China caused COVID, but we're not in virus. We're not in the virus. Where is there so much hate? Asian Americans are part of American too. We help build and heal this country. And to frontline worker as nurses and medical staff and as business owner. The one thing I am encouraged by this seeing young people standing up and fighting for the right. It is so encouraging to see young people run for office. And we see Asian now serving in the Georgia capital. My daughters are lawyers also. I see hope in the younger generation that they are speaking up to people who looks like me, for people who looks like us. My prayer is to help healing. We have the nurses in our community recover from the tragedy and rise up. We have a saying on Korean, fighting. I say to the fighting. Thank you so much, and God bless you.
It's so powerful to hear an Asian elder speak. I saw many of you incredibly moved by that. Now, on the opposite end of the spectrum, we have Tyler Lee. Tyler is a high school student at Peachtree Ridge High School in Suwanee, Georgia. He became a gun violence advocate after the 2022 Uvalde, Texas shootings that claimed the lives of multiple children and teachers. He has been featured in the Atlanta Journal-Constitution, Fox 5 Atlanta, the Korea Times Atlanta, and more. Tyler is also an acclaimed political campaigner who started his work in campaigns after he helped flip 3 congressional seats in Georgia during the 2020 elections. He is the future, and we hope one day, instead of just working on these campaigns, he will be running for office. Tyler.
Well, I did have 2 versions of this speech. One of them was going to be quick, but I realized this is not something that we can't be quick about. So I'm going to read off the second script. My name is Tyler Lee. I'm a gun violence advocate, and for everyone wondering I am sort of skipping high school today, so, but I hope and I know it's for a good reason. On this day, March 16th, a gunman entered 3 Asian-owned and operated spas in the Atlanta metropolitan area and murdered 6 members of the AAPI community, as well as 2 other individuals in broad daylight. He started his rampage near Ackworth, Georgia, at Young's Asian Massage. It's an establishment that bears the same name as my grandmother. What happened next over the course of hours truly horrified me. I was scrolling through social media when a line of news outlets started to pump out the devastating news that members of my own community had been slaughtered, no better than as if they were animals. These things don't happen here, is what I remember saying. I was so used to these types of mass casualty events happening in other places, but it hit me hard when I had to accept the fact that it did in fact happen, and it happened close to me. I live in Gwinnett, I live in Duluth specifically, and I believe one of the victims also lived in Duluth as well and commuted to Atlanta, just like my mother. So it really is impactful and emotional on me. Now, I'm not going to claim to be the most Asian person at this rally. My peers often joke that I'm a banana. I'm yellow on the outside and white on the inside. But this event shocked me to my core as what I am. I'm an Asian American, and I was forced to confront the fact. That this individual had targeted people of the same racial identity as me. Asian Americans are hardworking people with families, traditions, and cultures that are unique and special. My grandparents are Korean immigrants, and my father was born in Korea before he moved to the United States. And to be quite frank, the shooter knew absolutely nothing about the lives we live as Asian Americans. As special and unique as we are, we also share many commonalities with everyone else inside this United States. We go to school and work just the same as anyone else. My parents, my mom is right there. She wants me to receive a good quality education, just the same as anyone else with children in this country. For this man to come and shatter the worlds of so many people in my community because he viewed us as different, it makes me emotional, it makes me angry, and it made me want to cry. I got into politics originally because it was the right thing to do. The year was 2020, and massive national upset over the current state of policing and politics was huge. I thought the best way I could serve my community at that time was through electoral change. And through that, I helped flip 3 seats in the United States Congress. It was never my intention to become a gun violence advocate originally. As a high schooler, I was just trying to make it through the 4 years, and I am 2 years well into it. But things changed when a gunman entered Robb Elementary School in Uvalde, Texas, and murdered 21 people, 19 kids and 2 adults. Those people deserve to be here today. They deserve to make their families, to forge relationships, to have children, to continue to have weekly dinners with their grandparents and their parents. It's something that is just quite awful, and it is preventative. That's what really breaks my heart. I began speaking out to anyone I could after that incident, the news, elected officials, fellow students. I had to get this message of gun violence and the preventative measures we could take out in the open, even if I was just one person in my community. The United States is one of the greatest countries in the world. If it wasn't, then why would so many people choose to leave the lives they built in other countries to come here in search of better academic opportunities, better workplace opportunities? But yet every person that is a citizen of this nation rolls the dice every single day when they leave their house, going to school, work, and places of recreation. And quite frankly, the possibility that I may not come back from school one day because of the actions of one person with a gun, it scares me deeply. All 8 people who were murdered on March 16th, this day 2 years ago, deserved to come home to their families. The final place they should have been that day was in their beds drifting off to sleep. The last thing they should have ever seen was the inside of a medical examiner's van. My heart breaks for them truly every single day a preventable tragedy like this happens. The gunman was a young man not too much older than me, and he purchased a 9mm handgun hours before he committed this mass murder. He was able to obtain a pistol like it was candy at the drugstore. This transaction was not scrutinized as heavily as it should have been. Nothing more nothing more was done to stop him. Not a waiting period or a check-in with law enforcement. It was preventable. This could have all been avoided. This state is my home. I was born at DeKalb Medical. I was raised in Gwinnett County, and I attend school at Peachtree Ridge High School in Suwanee, Georgia. To see a state as great as Georgia go backwards and make it so easy for someone to obtain a weapon capable of this mass violence, it breaks me. It really does. And in the state of Georgia, it is easier to obtain a firearm than it is to cast a ballot. It doesn't make sense. I'll wrap it up quickly now. I apologize. There is a rise in hate crimes against Asian people, especially after the COVID-19 pandemic, where we were scapegoated as carriers of the virus. Hate and guns are a very dangerous combination, and the easy availability of firearms is irresponsible. Legislators that refuse to introduce and support common sense gun safety laws, they have blood on their hands. Every day, communities like ours and others are targeted by this type of senseless hate. Anti-Asian hate has no home here. Let that be known. I can only hope that certain legislators feel the same way in that building right over there as the session ends. And just to end this off, I really do appreciate this event being organized. We have seen so many mass shootings across this country that the names, faces, and identities of the victims, they start to become forgotten. They start to become forgotten, nothing more than statistics. And it is so important that we keep the light burning, that we keep the spirit of these beloved members of the community alive.
Thank you so much, Tyler. He reminds us that the victims are always with us. Sarah Hamilton is a dear friend of mine, and I've known her since she was a law student at Emory. She is now a high-powered lawyer, working as an employment and labor litigation counsel at UPS. She has served as past president of the Korean American Bar Association of Georgia the entire time during the pandemic. And we both served on the Georgia Asian Pacific American Bar Association together as board members. After March 16th, Sarah and members of the Asian American lawyers in Georgia worked tirelessly to form the AAPI Crime Victims and Education Fund, which raised funds not only for the victims of the March 16th families, but also support for other victims of anti-Asian hate. And it intends to provide a platform to educate the community and government entities about how to better serve our AAPI communities. I give you Sarah Hamilton.
Thank you, Bonnie. It's so nice to see so many friends here. And on this day of mourning and remembrance, I'd like to actually offer kind of a message of hope and maybe a different insight on things. So, as Bonnie mentioned, at the time of the pandemic and the time of this event, I was the president of the Korean Bar Association Georgia, and like everyone, it was totally surreal when it happened right next door. We had already identified a lot of the Korean American families affected because members in our bar association had represented some of them in previous legal matters, and we were there before it kind of even broke naturally, the names did. And so I really want to take a minute to say that this community is great. This was an awful event, but I don't want you to forget that the people in this room are amazing people. Let me tell you why. As soon as this happened, because of my position in the Bar Association, we started getting contacted by different groups. And unfortunately, there's a lot of groups that handle victims in crime. One of them is called Victims First, and then there's the National Compassion Fund. And it was truly heartbreaking. Through that group, I met and spoke to families at other high-profile events, Aurora, Orlando, Vegas, and I learned that the behind the scenes after these events with regards to the fundraising can be complete chaos. It can be totally traumatizing with people taking advantage of people and lots of just shenanigans. And it was heartbreaking to learn this. I had no idea. So why I'm really proud of this community is because everyone, this wasn't just the bar associations, it was all of the groups here on this poster and many people who are not here. In my perspective, all took actions to affirmatively do the right thing. And I think because of that, there was a lot of people working together. We did bring in the National Compassion Fund, and I hope that because of that, the process for the fundraising and for families was orderly, it was ethical, and I think that's the very least we could have done to honor the victims. So I am immensely proud, and you guys should know that I still stay in touch with the leader of one of the groups who represents, and there's a lot of family members part of this group, and we're still held up as an example. Atlanta, this isn't public, it's behind the scenes, but I just want you guys to know the effect you've had when these groups go around to other high profile shootings that happened since then and said, be like Atlanta, don't be like these other things where the shenanigans happens behind the scenes. So this is a great community. Since then, there was a federal law passed that incentivized local police departments to report crimes. And of course, Georgia had a hate crimes act on the books the year prior. And there are some statistics released people talked about, and I feel confident that there will be more data released in the future. And why does this matter? There's a lot of talk today about funding. I feel confident the funding is coming. It's not enough and it's not fast enough, but it's coming. And the reason why is because what is measured is what's addressed. And that's one of the really important parts of this, is that we're measured in a sense because that is what will ultimately let us go and make the case to make the changes we want. One part of it, along with everything else everyone's talking about here, the advocacy, education. I'm going to share something really personal about why this matters, because in 2014, I was a lawyer. I was a young lawyer. I think I was dressed like a lawyer, maybe not acting like a lawyer, but I was part of a totally unprovoked assault and battery, and it was based on race. How do I know? Because of the words used. At the time, I didn't tell anyone. I reported to the police, and I went to the police station to do a lineup, which is way harder than anyone can imagine. I actually failed at it. And I told the detective at that point, and I went back and actually, after this all happened, and looked back at my statement, and I was very adamant. This was based on race. And the detective told me to the effect of, well, there's not much I can do about that because we can pass this over to the feds, but the feds basically are not going to prosecute, in their eyes, a simple assault and battery. So anyway, I was very fortunate in this sense because before I went to the lineup, I didn't know it was actually on video, but it was, and it was prosecuted, and I was very lucky in that sense. But that's not reported anywhere. And so when all these things came out during the pandemic and people were saying, oh my gosh, there's hate crimes, I mean, in some sense, the visibility is important because what's measured is addressed. But how many other cases of that previously were there that were never measured and addressed? So I feel confident the funding's on the way once the data is in place in combination with all the work of the people in this room. But we also can't forget the importance of private funding and the importance of what we have to bring to the table. And that was the second thing we learned as lawyers when we were kind of thrust into this, is not only was there the fundraising, the orderly kind of donations of the families affected on March 16th, but there was also a second fund we created. We believe it's the first fund of its kind that's supporting and focused on AAPI and crime victims and education. So to date, we've raised over 6 figures. We're really going to kick off the fundraising this year with a goal of raising $1 million. And, the focus of this is not only to support crime victims on an emergency basis. There are, by the way, national and state crime victims funds, but they're incredibly slow to pay out. It does not help the most immediate needs of people who are victims of crime, that if we let them slip through the cracks, they literally can't get back up. I'm talking about things that are due now.
your rent, and your car payments. So that's what this fund focuses on. A lot of the state funds too also, some of them exclude undocumented persons. So there's a lot of need for private funding, and there's a lot of need also to provide education programs and to go do educational outreach programs so that we can foster trust and points of contact between law enforcement and the AAPI community. So that's what we do. So I would like to close by saying thank you again. You guys all can make a difference. You all have made a difference by being here, by being involved, by giving money, and most of all, by being kind. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much. If we could move this podium just a little bit to the side, because we're going to take some time to acknowledge our sponsors on this banner. So we can move the podium just a little bit to the side. This side, to the right. Thank you. I just also wanted to acknowledge again, you have these beautiful signs at your table. Will you pick them up and raise them up? As mentioned, these images are provided by M.L.K, and who is here today to speak with us. And before we break for this amazing artist panel, we need to take some time to acknowledge our sponsors here today. So, our nonprofit organizational sponsors include Stand with Asian Americans, SWA. For those of you who don't know, SWA is the largest coalition of Asian American entrepreneurs, investors, business leaders, and activists that are united in our mission to drive justice and equity for all. Anyone can get involved to use their ingenuity and talent to galvanize the next generation of Asian American activism. They have pledged $10,000 every year for the next 10 years to underwrite and support Atlanta's March 16th commemoration events. Additionally, we have the Asian American Foundation, APAs versus Hate, Charles Jones, the Asian American Crime Victims and Education Fund, as Sarah mentioned, Asian American Voices for Education, Ahmed, which is our fiscal agent, the Center for Pan-Asian Community Services, CPAS, the Chinese Community Federation of Atlanta, Georgia AAPI Hub, the Georgia Asian Pacific American Bar Association, GAPABA, and the GAPABA Law Foundation, the Georgia Asian Times, Georgia Public Broadcasting, the Georgia Trial Lawyers Association, the Korean American Bar Association of Georgia, KABAGA, the Korean American Coalition, Atlanta, and NACA, the National Association of Chinese Americans.
We cannot also do this work without the community of businesses and individuals that sponsored this event today. Better Today Therapy, Buckhead Goats Farmhouse, you seeing the goats? Make sure you see Little Teacup before you leave. Ramos and Law, Quinley, An Chin, and family. Michael and Jamie Webb. Your ad attorney LLC, Alina Lee, is here with us today. Wu Yin and Bonnie Yu. And thank you so much for your generosity. We cannot, again, do this work without you. And for those of you who are enjoying our free events, if you'd like to donate to the cause, there is a QR code available for PayPal, Zelle, or fiscal agent for Asian American Voices for Education as our fiscal agent, and it's right there at the table. But at this time, we've talked a lot about the stories of our families that have been impacted. We talked about the statistics. We talked about the gaps and the barriers within our communities. And so here we are. What are we going to do about this outside community? So on the tables, you will see postcards that we printed for you with Amanda's art. And Amanda, would you please just stand up and be recognized for this incredible art that you do? And this is where we are asking you for actions, for support, for us to hold our legislators accountable, the legislators and leaders that represent you. And we created a very simple sheet here. And I know many of us are in different stages of our civic engagement, our involvement with our leaders that represent us. And so we created a quick link up on top, right, of who represents you. So I encourage you today just to pull out your phones, pull up, my voter page, mvp.sos.ga.gov, right? Put in your initial, your last name, your county, your date of birth, pull up your polling location, but also, share with you some additional information. And then there you can click on My Districts and Elected Officials. These are the individuals that want to hear your voice, want to hear what issues impact you, your families, and they want to hear what you care about. And this is where we're asking for your support. Those postcards are there, they're unstamped, we have stamps available. We ask that you take some time with the pens that are on there to write about some of the issues. What do you want your legislators and the individuals that represent you to do for you and your community? And you've heard all of these challenges that our communities are facing, and as allies, as communities, as those who are directly impacted, let's hold these leaders accountable. Stories of violence and senseless tragedies, right, in our communities. We ask that you share that with your legislators. What are they going to do about it? What would you like for them to do about it? Expanding access to education and business opportunities for our immigrants and our families. Increasing language access, right? The vital services that would help a family gain access to these services. Growing AAPI voter engagement and outreach, and you heard many of our young leaders, right, pushing to make sure that the leaders represent us. Please share your stories. You have very incredible stories from your families that you can share with them as they make and change legislation that will impact you. So I encourage you, and I also challenge you today, right, to take a few moments, write those notes, find your legislators, address it to them, and we have a little basket out there for you to drop them in, and we'll be glad to stamp them and send them and drop them off on your behalf. Do we thank you for that? And if you have any questions about that, please do let one of us know. We have volunteers. So the incredible volunteers, would you mind just raising your hands? And coalition members? Any of them will be able to answer some of your questions there. Okay. And then, so now we're approaching the finale of our rally. An exciting panel with 3 renowned AAPI artists, moderated by very own Bonnie Yoon. And so Bonnie is so humble, and she's probably, gearing up for this next session here. We're going to take a few minutes, and so we're going to ask our volunteers to go ahead, just to gear up for moving the tables. And I know we have some media mics here. We're going to give the media just a minute just to move things, but we're going to have a panel discussion here. But let me just go back to Bonnie, our humble leader, and always the one to do selfies and behind the scenes work, right? But she's the co-chair of CAPABA, the Georgia APA Bar Association Law Foundation. And she started her career as an immigration attorney and was recognized for her advocacy and her support of the community as a White House champion of change. She worked for over a decade organizing events just like this event here today. And so Bonnie, we are so excited for you to moderate the panel, and we'll pass it over to you and our volunteers who can help start up the next panel. As we are gearing up, I just wanted to inform you that we do have lunch available. These are box lunches to bring the individuals who are working out. We just have a few minutes. We'll have the lunch out on the tables for everyone as we go through the panel.
And please take this time to continue
I know. Your art is talking.
You're gonna have to share.
And I'll share also. They are, but they're not really gonna do that.
This is pretty loud.
We have 3 microphones. Okay, if everybody would take their seats, we're gonna start in 30 seconds. 30 seconds. Ten seconds.
Counting it down.
9, 8,
Looking at
7,
y'all.
6, 5,
Bonnie's just like the Fox Theater.
4, 3.
Great announcing voice.
All right. Thank you, everyone, for your patience leading up to what I believe may be the highlight of this March 16th rally. Our panel discussion with our renowned Asian American artists and activists include multimedia artist Amanda Pakwantakya, author, producer, filmmaker, and activist Curtis Chin, and content creator, video artist, and spoken word storyteller Katie Vu. And although I'm an attorney by training and a legal recruiter by profession now, I also wear another hat. I sit on the board of Arts ATL, which is an online media outlet dedicated to covering art in Atlanta. So it is my joy to talk to all 3 of you. Think of me as your Oprah for today. And I also want to encourage you to have a conversation amongst yourselves, all right? So looking around you, these beautiful rally signs, during the pandemic, as Asians were experiencing unfair scapegoating for causing COVID, did it not move you to see these images and messages projected globally around the world that we are not a virus, that we belong here, that we too are American? When you listened to Katie Vu and her spoken word piece, what did you feel? Poetry evokes emotions because it is a multi-sensory experience. Images and emotions unleashed onto paper and into verbal expression. While I already previously spoke briefly to the audience about Amanda and Katie, I wanted to introduce you to my friend and renowned writer, producer, filmmaker, and multiple hats, and AAPI activist, Curtis Chin. Curtis grew up in Detroit. So in 1982, I don't know if people in the audience know what happened in 1982 in Detroit. But 2 white men murdered Vincent Chin, Chinese American man. And in the aftermath, ignited the Asian American civil rights movement. And fast forward to today, more than 40 years later, and that killing is still as raw and resonates chillingly with what happened in Atlanta just 2 years ago. So Curtis produced the movie Vincent Who, which documented this killing. This was at the height of anti-Japanese sentiments arising from massive layoffs in the auto industry. And I see the parallels in 2020 during the pandemic as well, the hysteria of anti-Asian hate. Chin's killers, unfortunately, got off with a $3,000 fine and 3 years probation, but no jail time. So outraged by this injustice, Asian Americans around the country united for the first time across ethnic and socioeconomic lines to form a pan-Asian identity and a nascent civil rights movement. So Curtis now lives in LA. Thank you for flying all the way in, Curtis. And he co-founded the Asian American Writers Workshop dedicated to promoting AAPI writers. He also worked as Director of Outreach for the Democratic National Committee and served on Barack Obama's Asian American Leadership Committee. A prolific writer for network TV and various famous publications, Curtis recently published his memoirs, Everything I Learned in a Chinese Restaurant. So Curtis, let's kick things off. I love the title of your book. So for all of you, let's take it back to the beginning, shall we? We want to delve into all your backgrounds, where you grew up, your families, your immigrant histories, and how that informed your career trajectory as artists. So Curtis, you grew up in Detroit, growing up Asian American in a black and white city. That resonates deeply with AAPI's growing up in Atlanta. Can you tell us briefly, what was that like?
Well, first of all, thank you to the organizers for inviting me. I feel so honored to be here with all of you, and thank you for that warm introduction, Bonnie. Is this working correctly? Okay. Hi, is this better? Okay. As you mentioned, I'm from Detroit. So my origin story actually starts in 1967. Detroit had what was called the Detroit Riots, or the Detroit Rebellion, and my parents already had a Chinese restaurant, and it was opened in 1940 by my great-grandfather. And it was a really popular restaurant. But during those 5 days of the Detroit riots, they actually had to close the restaurant for the first time ever. And in those 5 days, they managed to have sex. And 9 months later, I was born as their riot baby. And so in some ways, I've always thought about race and sort of how I came about. But despite that, beginning, I grew up in a Chinese restaurant. I actually thought that I would be a waiter for the rest of my life because it was a popular restaurant, it was good food, my family was there. It was actually only after Vincent Chin had been murdered, because Vincent was actually a close family friend of ours. My uncle was his best man. I mean, it was a case that really shaped my identity. And as I said, as a kid, I never thought I was going to be a writer or an artist. It just wasn't in my, lane. I didn't know what that was about. But after Vincent had been murdered, I really was fascinated by the case. And I kept looking through the papers, trying to find articles and stories about him. There were very, very few. Meanwhile, at the same time, there were all these stories about the auto industry and the white auto workers. And I just kept thinking, like, well, who's telling Vincent's side of the story? And that's when I started my first writing career, which was writing letters to the editor, to the papers, none of which ever got published because I wasn't very good because I'm 14 years old. But it did set me on this journey of understanding that, writing and politics and history and perspective are all really, really important. And I've been fortunate to have a really wonderful career, writing for TV, and film, and now with my first book. So that's my story.
Well, Curtis is being super modest. But I also want to tie that to Amanda. So Amanda, thank you for flying in all the way from New York. So we have LA in the house, we have New York in the house, but you grew up in Atlanta with your Thai and an Indonesian immigrant family, who I understand also ran a restaurant. Is that right? So can you tell us about that? Hello?
Well, we can all share. Yes, that's right. I'm so honored to be here, and anytime I get to come home to Atlanta, it's a gift. So I'm just really grateful to be here. But yes, my dad owned and operated many Thai restaurants in the area, and
Do we know the name?
yes. So if you've ever had lunch or dinner at the King and I, or Pad Thai, or Malik, those are my dad's restaurants. And I'm always so grateful to hear stories from when I do work here of people who met their significant others at my dad's restaurants, or, if my dad's restaurants were their neighborhood spots. But, a few years ago, I actually read an article that essentially credits my dad with bringing Thai food to Atlanta. And I was like, whoa, Dad, this you? And it just made me reflect on the fact that when I was growing up, I didn't know that. I didn't know my dad's outsized impact. And, this was just the way our family was, making a life in the American South. But I think it just helps me understand how great impact or movements often have humble beginnings. And the way they gain momentum is by inviting folks to take part, inviting people in, and then rallying folks towards a future that doesn't yet exist. But, as Bonnie asked, to take it back to the beginning, I was born at, Charlotte Community Hospital. I grew up in Norcross, and, I will always be a daughter of Atlanta, which means that anything that, impacts the Atlanta community, anything that I can do to sort of like uplift Atlanta brings me just great joy.
So Amanda, of course, your images are indelibly intertwined with these March 16 rallies and the AAPI rallies against hate. So I also wanted to sort of tie what you said. Your parents weren't really able to talk about your immigrant histories growing up because of that immigration trauma. And so Katie, when you came to the United States, I understand that your family experienced being torn apart by the Vietnam War. And when you came to the United States at the age of 2 or 3, you didn't know your own immigrant history, not until you got to college. So let's talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, thank you, Bonnie. Thank you all for being here. It's an honor to be on a panel with both of you. I feel major imposter syndrome here. But yeah, to take it back, I came here when I was 2. My sisters were Vietnamese-born people. Put on a boat when they were 4 and 6 years old, and to go with some distant relatives over here. And my parents, they couldn't leave at the time that they were pregnant with, my mom was pregnant with my brother. But I think after kind of letting your kids go like that, they're like, did we lose 2 children? Will we ever see them again? So they had 2 more, and my brother and I, and when we were reunited in Orlando, Florida, we have these photos that are beautiful from our reuniting, and up until college, I had no idea about my family story, because I'm sure my parents aren't wanting to retell those stories, and my sister never really talked about it either. But when I did a family histories project, I actually Googled my family and then found an article on the Orlando Sentinel where a photojournalist had kind of followed our family around in the 1 week where we were reunited. And the article wasn't long. It was like maybe 3 tweets. And it was so short, but it had this series of photos of when we were at the airport reunited with my sisters for the first time, where they interviewed my sister who's 8 years old. And seeing that article was more context than I had ever received in my life. And I was like, I'm gonna be a journalist. So I reached out to that photojournalist, and we had emailed, and it was just like, I don't know, just the coolest moment. I'm like, I gotta do this. Can I follow in your footsteps? Can I help other people tell their family histories as well?
Thank you, Katie. So what I see running through your stories as a common thread are these immigrant backgrounds and the compelling need to share your stories, our stories. So why don't we start with Curtis? What initially inspired you to become an artist? And what would you say was your first significant work. I suspect it is Vincent Wu, but tell me about that process.
Well, like I said, I had no expectations of being a writer. I wasn't one of those kids that, had this fantasy I grew up and write a book. I would say, look, at our Chinese restaurant, we didn't have anything to read. It was just like a phone book where I looked for all the Asian names, but outside that, we got two types of books, which were left behind by all our customers. One were like the Harlequin romance books, and the other one was the Bible. And I thought it was interesting, either one of them, so I just had no interest in writing at all. And like I said, it was only by the time I got to high school. My first success as a writer, I hate to admit this though, but was probably getting on the high school paper. But I was kind of a right-wing Republican at that time. This is during the 80s, during the height of Reagan, and I was like the Asian Alex P. Keaton. And so that was my first success, but I don't really want to talk about it too much.
Amanda.
I'm sorry, I'll refer to the question.
Your first, what would you say is your first significant work?
My first significant work. Well, I guess let me first take it back to the moment that I realized that, I wasn't going to be a neuroscientist like my parents wanted. I was going to be an artist. So I was working in the lab. I graduated from Columbia with a degree in neuroscience, and I was, going to do research, going to write papers, but then I started to realize that, I want to bring people together through the things that I make rather than the papers that I write. And it became very clear to me that, this research path, I've got to pivot. So I did, but my first significant work actually grew out of my background in science. So I created this portrait series that really uplifted the unsung and unseen, often forgotten women of color in STEM that have really shaped our society. The series is called Beyond Cherry. I partnered with the March for Science, and it just helped me understand in a big way how something so personal can be very powerful. And the only reason I created it also is because a friend of mine sat me down and was like, look, we are feeling really not great after the 2016 election. Let's do something about it. Let's contribute in a way that is unique to us. Let's contribute in a way that only we can. And I think that, insight has really sort of threaded through my work, but also is so crucial for how we care for our communities today. We can all do something, even if it's small, and we can all contribute in our own unique ways.
I was really following your answer. What's the question?
What was your first?
Yeah, okay. Because I spent my childhood in Georgia, naturally I was going to become a famous rapper. And then I learned that I had no rhythm, so they were like, did you know spoken word is this art form where you don't need rhythm? And I'm like, sign me up. So I just kind of started writing little raps in school. We had a lot of little freestyles in the back of the bus. Weren't really in homeroom class. There were just a lot of freestyles. So I was like, yeah, I'm a rapper. And so when I wrote my first piece in college, telling my mom that I wasn't going to be a doctor, right? It got a lot of back then it was YouTube was growing, and I posted it on YouTube for the first time. Folks, just being such a small town gal, I grew up on a farm, a chicken farm. So when strangers were talking to you about your art, I was like, what is this? And they invited me to come out and speak. It's just a piece for my mom. I don't understand how y'all can relate, but I started learning once I was going across the country that every child of immigrant related to Latin America. And that's when, I think specifically when folks started saying we have an honorarium, is when I realized that being an artist was a viable thing for me. Because I gotta pay bills.
That's absolutely right. And when I first heard you were about your chicken farms, it was totally giving me the movie vibes, right? Growing up rural, nowhere in Georgia. So I want to bring us forward. We're now 40 years from the killing of Vincent Chin, 3 years from the outbreak of the pandemic, and then 2 years from March 16. How have the historical AAPI events informed your growth as an artist and then impacted the creation of your work? And then we'll start with the OG for Vincent Chin.
Okay, so I need to talk a little bit about, so maybe that I've been working on this actually my book. It's a memoir, and it's coming out this fall from Blue Brown. It's called Maybe Whatever, and I learned in a Chinese restaurant. And my prologue actually starts off with the history of the Chinese revenue, specifically my family. It was in the late 1800s, great-great-grandfather moving from Canton, China, to Canton, Ohio, before they realized there were many Chinese people there. And then they moved up to Detroit, and the Detroit area was booming with the auto industry. So one of the things that I try to do outside of, but I don't talk about education or history because we talk about like the Chinese exclusion and how that impacted my family, but more specifically the rise of Chinese restaurants and how that opened up doors for my family. So our restaurant was like super popular in the 60 years that we ran it. I always make people get somebody that goes slow. We know all like any even like the skin is a sauce. But over the 60 years, we sold over 10 million hamburgers. Like over 4,000 hamburgers, we really damn good. And so I knew that that history more important for me, but just specifically, I'm always in daughter. I'm always in the son of Detroit. And so for me, I really wanted to do Detroit history to get to my family's history. Because I think that's a lot of time, we think of Asian recognition as this parallel track that isn't really integrated with regular American history. And what I really wanted to do is read it so that you see the development. So that you make me think about this book, and you think that you're learning about the Chinese American family, but what you really are is you're learning about American history. This is so much of what my family went through. It's just tied into the city and vice versa. We're a product of it. And so, maybe, so that's the Asian American history, but I think American history in general, and specifically Detroit history. So something that I try to do within my work.
Next, should I go? Go ahead. So how have these historical events impacted my work? I think none of us are untouched by events that impact our community. Especially as artists, we are always trying to ask how do we serve. Especially socially engaged artists, we are trying to understand how do we create spaces of hope and healing and unburdening. So I think, let me take us all back to, when I started actually seeing the news roll in about the spot shootings, and I just, had this creeping dread in my body, and I just knew in my bones that it was just, yet another manifestation of anti-Asian hate. But during that time, I was creating this installation called May We Know Our Own Strength, and it was created to honor survivor stories. And it was a space that had these 16 internet-connected printers that were also connected to lights. And New Yorkers and folks around the world could submit their survivor stories, so send secret suffering through this public website, and it would print in real time in this space, and then a light would turn on. Almost as if, no matter what you're unburdening, we are listening. We believe you, we hear you, we see you. So as part of that work, because, I was just so devastated by what had happened in Atlanta, I decided to incorporate a vigil every night at 8 p.m. where, all the lights of the installation would turn on and shine into the darkness, and all of these receipt printers would just keep on saying the names of all the victims. And of course, you've seen the work around the world, and I think what has just been so meaningful to me is how my work has been a symbol for hope, for strength, for resilience. But it's also been such a symbol for allyship and solidarity. And, when folks send me snaps of my work in small town storefronts from Middle America or, villages in Europe, I'm always just so surprised and really deeply moved. Because, when you see that work, that place is safe for Asian Americans.
I'm again referring, I'm gonna stop going after you. I think I'm tired of us being known for our grief. In my artist life, I took a bit of a break to go head first into organizing, and that's how you and I met, Bonnie. But I started Wake Up Atlanta, which it was a digital series to get Asian Americans more civically engaged, and we did a big census 2020 series of videos in 15 different languages to break down the census and urge us folks in our community to fill out the census. And we did a ton of voter registration drives, all the poll monitoring that you and I would do together, and that to me was taking action. Art wasn't, in my eyes. And I think whenever the shootings happened, I was working on our short film. We were having a production meeting, and it was my first step away from organizing. In the 5 years that we were organizing since 2016, 17. But I was I just wanted to do something joyful and tell a story about an Asian American family. We're just sitting in my living room planning the shoot, and we got the news. I live about 10, 15 minutes away from the spa, and I thought to myself, I think we should not do the rest of this. We need to organize. We have a call tomorrow, a community call. We need to help start the Victims Fund. We need to help make media statements. And this isn't the time for art. And I was reminded by my wonderful community that art is activism. And that we needed to keep doing the thing and tell stories and make sure that people know that we are complex and whole and real. So I think that's what I want to continue doing, is making sure that artists know that they're part of the movement.
I'm going to skip ahead a little bit. Can you comment a little bit on audience response that you've seen from both the AAPI communities and then from other communities of color, and then also possibly from the white majority? What have you observed about viewers' reactions or comments and the differences? And have you seen sort of an evolution of reaction to your art?
First. Well, I've had the pleasure of screening my films in over 600 places in 16, 17 countries. So, yeah, no, it's been wonderful. I mean, so I've been in front of Black audiences, HBCUs, but also all white audiences, all Latino audiences. They all love it. No, I'm kidding. One thing that I was thinking was just related to this, though, is just one of the reasons I wrote this memoir was that I did want to bring people together. I feel like our country is really divided right now. Like we have these little silos. We don't talk to each other. The Chinese restaurants are actually one of the few places where you can go in and see people of different racial, religious, socioeconomic backgrounds. And I wanted to use that as an opportunity to sort of bring people in. So it's sort of like, come for the Chinese food, but stay for the talk on racism. Like that's how I'm pitching my book. But it was really interesting because one of the things I tried to do during this period of COVID was I signed up for a lot of these writing groups across the world, right? To sort of see how the book would play internationally or even locally. And so I actually signed up for writing groups in Glasgow, in Germany, even one here in Atlanta, one in Phoenix, one in Detroit. And so I was trying to get all this different perspective. And I did find something really interesting is that, so I was, as I mentioned to you guys, in the prologue, I talked about, the Detroit riots. And one of the feedback that I got was really interesting to me was differing opinions from two different early readers. One was a elderly white woman, retired doctor in Phoenix, Arizona. She gave me lots of really great notes on the book, but one of the comments that she said about the riots was that I'm okay talking about racism, but I can't have you talk about it in the prologue because it's too early for me. You have to work me into these issues, right? But then when I showed that same piece to a Black reader in Detroit, he's like, no, you have to talk about these things front and center, otherwise I think you're avoiding the subject, and I don't trust you. And so, to me as a writer who is trying to bring these two different sides together, it's a balancing act of how much can you push audiences and how much can you make sure people are engaged? And I think that's something as we as Asian Americans oftentimes having to be in that outside of understanding these different perspectives of having to balance it, So I think it's a challenge, but it's also a wonderful opportunity because you can hear from both sides in some ways, right? There's a little level of trust, but also mistrust where they're holding us a little bit more accountable. So I think it's a good thing.
I'm gonna have Katie speak next, so that she's not right after.
Okay. I think that I performed a lot of my spoken word for audiences that weren't Asian American, and I think it was received so warmly by Black communities because spoken word is deeply ingrained in the community, and so that's where I felt my comfort, and that's where I felt like I was best received. And then when I started, and when I actually started to perform for more Asian American audiences, I felt really intimidated because it was like this girl going up and being so too strong, and I'd be like, oh God, I'm sorry.
Not the good Asian.
And I think now Asian American audiences are more comfortable with maybe performance, poetry in that way, but at the time it was blank faces and performing for them, and I, no snapping either. I was like, oh God, they hated it. But it's gotten so much better. And on the art front, when we made the coloring book, and it was exhibited on the Beltline, I don't do physical art. That was our first time doing physical art. Was my art is digital. So but I was kind of just a creep and sat on the Beltline and watched people watch the art. And it was just so cool to see different folks who weren't Asian American enjoying the exhibit and learning from it. Because if we as Asian Americans didn't know some of these figures, so that was a real treat. And then being kind of recognized by national media for something that wasn't grief was wonderful.
I guess I would say that I've just been so grateful that my work has been able to receive the visibility that it has. And I mean, I guess a part of me is like, I guess I'm not surprised because it's usually very big and everywhere by design. Because I think art sometimes allows us to force conversations that aren't being had. And they allow us to, you know, uplift the depth and resilience and beauty of our communities. And, you know, of course, all the art you see around you today is largely Asian American, but in my art, I'm depicting all marginalized communities and telling the stories of so many marginalized communities. And a lot of my art invites people to participate. I'm asking people for the gift of their stories. And I treat these gifts as sacred because they're often given in spaces of, you know, healing and unburdening. And I think from this great vulnerability, it's given me courage to speak even more loudly, to, you know, to be myself, to create in a way that isn't boxed in, and to really explore the multitudes that I know we all have inside of us. But I'll just share one particular moment from a public art series that I created at the Main Center last summer. I created a piece called Gather, and it was a bunch of different monuments and rituals that invited people to sort of like find catharsis, hope, and joy, and sort of lay down their sadness. And a Thai student walked by as I was running one of my rituals that allowed people to write on, you know, these vessels and float into water their grief. And she told me, you know, I've never seen a Thai person take up this much space. And that just hit me so hard. Because it's true, we are a very small population in the United States, and the next thing that she said just always sticks with me. And she told me that, you know, your art being this big, taking up this much space, makes me feel like my art belongs here too.
I don't know if y'all know, but we do have some of Amanda's art in a mural in Midtown Atlanta. And I hope there will be future opportunities to collaborate, possibly with these artists here, to bring more of that, maybe on the Beltline, I'm just saying. So I kind of want to bring you down to the present. What are you working on right now? I mean, I know, Curtis, you've just published your memoirs, but you know, what are you working on right now, and what can we expect from you next?
So my book comes out October 17th. I have postcards if anybody's interested. You can pre-order them now. Writing-wise, I have two projects. One, I'm developing a kids show with PBS, and the other one is I'm developing a young adult program for Warner Brothers. So that's all
So I'm working on a few things. Some of them I can't share publicly yet, but the ones that I can are civic practice residencies with the Asian Art Museum and Poster House in New York, where I'm creating archives of our stories. So when I was out in the Bay Area, I spoke to over 100 Asian American folks from 5 years old to 95, and I asked them about inheritance, because it's just something that I've been deeply interested in. You know, every time I come home and my dad just sort of like tosses out a tiny little gem of a new story, I'm like furiously scribbling it down because it's just so rare. And I just reflect on, you know, so much of our stories are lost inside of, you know, our elders or our parents or our families because of trauma, because of, you know, different kinds of hardship. And I want to make sure that we hold on to the pieces that tell us who we are and tell the next generation of who they are. So, you know, I've been recording folks' voices and photographing artifacts. I'll, you know, paint portraits of all the people I've spoken to, and I'm just really excited about that. I'm doing something similar in Chinatowns across the United States as well. So maybe Atlanta's Chinatown will be, you know, what I tackle next after Manhattan. But also, spring 2024, I'm working on a book with author Joanna Ho with Scholastic. It's basically an Asian American anthem. So hopefully I'll be able to share more about that with you all.
I can talk about everything. I wish I had something that I'm like, I have to keep it on under wraps. But ever since we did the coloring book, have been really interested in working with children, with younger artists who, like me, didn't see that art can heal and can transform and is part of the movement. So we're developing a lot of different workshops and series to work with young people, but also everybody, because I feel like it is intimidating to tell stories when you're not an artist or like a writer. So we're trying to make that more accessible. And I'm also working on my voice acting career. That's kind of my next endeavor is to make sure more American voices, quite literally, are telling our stories.
Yeah, didn't I see you practicing with you, Marcel the Shell?
I did.
Yes. So I love how you talk about, you want to make sure that we are more than just our grief, more than just our sorrow. So how do you envision your art healing and bringing our communities together?
So growing up in Detroit was, especially in the 80s, was really kind of rough. I mean, beyond, the general crime of the city, we had crack and AIDS, and 5 people that had been murdered by the time I was 18 years old. So there's a lot of grief. I actually make a joke about it in my book because I said, like, we're Buddhists. I know, my parents always taught me that suffering was part of life, but this was getting kind of ridiculous. I mean, the amount of suffering we had to go through in Detroit. Literally, like, my whole childhood was burning down right in front of me, like all the buildings and everything. And so I think for me, I've always just had to have an optimistic outlook to sort of make it out of that, because you could be really depressed by all the difficulties of life. And so even though all that happens in my book, it's a humor book, believe it or not. You know what I mean? My upcoming memoir. Because I think you gotta find the humor in life sometimes. And not to turn it too dark, but I'm as a gay man of that generation, I literally thought I'd be dead by the age of 30. And I'll share one more gruesome story. So Vincent Chin was my freshman year. My senior year in high school was one of our favorite customers. Always came in at strange hours by himself. He was an ER doctor. Said he was an ER doctor. Turned out he was actually a famous psychiatrist who was coming to our area to hire the prostitutes. And he wanted to break off with this one girl, and the pimp got so upset that he took a baseball bat, bashed in his head, chopped up his body with a Ginsu knife, and littered it all across the freeway going up to northern Michigan. So combine that, it's like I really didn't want to go to. I thought with all the AIDS and everything, I just thought I'd be dead by the age of 30. And so to some degree, as a gay man of that generation, of that era, like I spent most of my 20s just holding my breath, just saying, God, if I can make it to 30, that's victory, And so I've always just had this attitude of really enjoying and appreciating all the life that you're given, because really, you're not really promised much in life. So anyway, I don't know if that was a depressing answer or what, but so that's why I don't get stuck in. Sorry. Yeah.
I think all of my work holds these sort of like indelible marks of my grief, but it also holds all of the, fervent joy and hope that I have. And I think so much of my work feels warm and joyful when you encounter it, not because I'm, hiding our grief, but because I don't think we need to be reminded of it. We live it every single day. So let's, move ourselves to action in a way that's about asking ourselves, how do we care for our communities? Because it's everyone's responsibility in the many different ways that we can. whether it's sort of like building, a little library to donate books, or, helping out at food rescues, or, passing legislation that supports our communities. All of that is part of the care that we can provide to our communities. And I guess I would also say that I think a lot of the work that I did in 2020 and 21 was very much about rebuke of hate. And it was sort of like in your face. It was, a mural on the side of a building, lots of sides of buildings. And it was something that just like made you pay attention, even if you didn't want to pay attention. But artists are inspired by the communities that they're accountable to. And what I've heard is that, what we need is healing. We need spaces to unburden, because our lives are so busy, and to be guided through an experience that gives you permission to be vulnerable, to lay down your burdens, has been something that I have heard. So it's something that I'm incorporating more into my practice, these rituals. In Thai and Indonesian culture, we have so many, all these festivals that allow us to splash water at each other to find catharsis, or, float these just like beautiful vessels made out of flowers onto water to take away the last year's burdens and grief. And inviting more folks to participate in these spaces, and seeing how, strangers in public space just holding each other and crying has just really, given me more courage to continue to hold these rituals and create work that is participatory. Because I think so much of the time, art, sits inside museums and galleries so often, and that's what people consider art. But I think all of us here know that, art is what brings communities together. That's the art that we want to see more of, and that's the art that we should continue to champion.
Moving forward with my art, I think especially being from South Georgia, and I think not believing that art was a real thing that you could do full time, continuing to push ourselves and our communities and our corporations to invest in our artists, and invest in artists to explore, experiment, play, because when your artists are ready and confident, and you come to them and say we have a project, like, we move forward. We don't have to be like, I don't know, I've never done that before. No, I have, because you paid me last year to do something similar. And I think as we're starting to see more media representation, this is all really great. But I just keep wanting to remind people with my art that we exist outside of the AAPI month. We exist outside of Lunar New Year. So I hope that that's how our art can always be taking up space in all the different spaces.
At this point, I wanted to invite any audience member who has any questions for our incredible panel. If anybody has any questions to ask them, or maybe to ask of them, would you like to have any questions for our panelists? Yes? Yeah. Come on over.
Thank you. Hello, my name is Corey Fisher, and I'm so pleased to be a part of this wonderful celebration. Thank you. You hinted about this. I just one brief question. Where in Atlanta exactly can we see your installations or your artwork? Thank you.
So there is, actually, honestly, murals kind of go up and down in Atlanta, so I'm not sure if it's still there. But the first mural I did in Atlanta is in just a parking lot right off of M.L.K. Drive. And the other one, right, just right there. Most of them are actually in the downtown area. And the other one is actually on the ground floor of the Google building, right next to, or maybe across from the MARTA station. I'm not sure if some of you had seen the two sort of like colorful birds that perched on top of this alleyway that Midtown Atlanta Arts had set up, but it's right next to it.
Yes, and actually I run past that mural when I do my power walk in Midtown. Come on up.
Okay, I have two questions. The first is, are you going to do spoken word for us this afternoon? Because that would be amazing. And number two, for anyone who wants to answer, my 10-year-old who is taking a video game break. She's an artist. I don't know if she wants to admit it, but do you have any advice for a young girl who is a comic artist and also makes interesting things out of recycled items? She's embarrassed. She's not looking at me.
Okay, maybe I can offer a piece or two of advice, and I think perhaps the first thing I would say is don't let anyone tell you that your voice isn't important and unique and necessary. I think so often our society discounts the opinions and the voices of youth, and I think we can all agree here how much they are the future and how they synthesize the world in a way that is just so very bright. But also, I'd say that you don't have to do it any other way than your own. Everyone will tell you that these are the ways that you should make art, that this is the way, this is the process. These are the schools that you have to go to, these are the places that you have to exhibit, but just take up that space because you deserve to, and tell our stories.
I did perform some spoken word earlier today. I'm happy to do it again. I have other pieces I can do if we have some time later. What is your daughter's name? Mackenzie? What you playing, Mackenzie?
A baseball game.
A video game? Imposter? That sounds cool. I wish I could play video games in the middle of the I think you got it right, Mackenzie. When I was trying to be an artist, I got really intimidated by things online, when people were posting, like, this person made this film, or, this person has this poem, and I was like, oh, okay, then I guess, like, the world doesn't need another one, So I was like, okay, I'm good. But I realized that no one can tell your story better than you. Like, no one can tell the chicken farm story better than me. And like your parents' story too. Like, no one's gonna want to try to tell that story but you. So I guess that's my little piece of my offering, is that your story is the best story. And for Mom, I hope you will encourage her to explore all the things and tell all the stories, no matter how trivial they feel at that day. One of my favorite pieces on YouTube is called Marcel the Shell, and it's literally about, like, a plastic shell, because the shell had a raspy voice. and it got like 30 million views in like a day. And I was like, raspy voices can do that?
It's a variation of things that they've already said, which is, I usually say this to older people, but you want to pursue a career in the arts, you're going to hear a lot of no's all the time, but don't let that no come from yourself. Always give yourself a yes. Always say yes, that you can do this, that your work matters, and that if you do hear a no from somebody, you just have to figure out how to convert that into yes.
I see Lily Pavian from We Love Buford Highway, Executive Director, and bringing art to Buford Highway.
First of all, I just can't tell you, thank you, Naomi, Cam, to everybody. I grew up in Atlanta, and Curtis, I have this kinship with you. I don't know, I feel it. The Dayton, Ohio is where my father first came here in this country from Taiwan. Our immigrant story started in a war-torn China, and all that trauma we have been carrying, and we still do. But I guess I want to make a general comment in terms of artists. I'm a little lag in this community. I grew up in Atlanta since 1979, and it was a very different South. And back then, we really didn't see a lot of us. My aunt was an artist. Her teacher was the last emperor of China's cousin. And we have this huge family, just dynamic story. And we know that all of our communities have those deep, rich heritage stories. But I just wanted to say, in terms of what you guys do and the impact, I'm new to this community of being seen. And I think that for so long, our communities, particularly first generation, Asians, we always put our head down. I know my parents did. And that really sort of matriculates over to the next generation. And you do walk with your head down in some sense. But I think it takes courage to be an artist, because all of it is about expression. But you take it a step further because it influences, it connects, and it makes people feel and think and ask. And I just want to say thank you for doing what you guys do, because it's just really important, particularly in Atlanta, in the South. Thank you.
And, I'd be remiss if I didn't note that there are artists in this audience. I see Carrie Lee from the Atlanta Chinese Dance Center here today. And, I just know that all of us hold that hope that art can bring to our lives. And with that note, I'd really love to see collaborations, possibly between the three of you. And maybe this is the seed that we can plant here today to maybe bring more of your art forward and to be more visible in the community, because we can be everything, everywhere, all at once. Woo! And if there are no more questions, I'd like to wrap up our panel, but this really is closing near the end of our program. So if I can invite Victoria back up here.
Yeah, we thank you so much for taking your time out of your busy schedule from family, work, even school. Tyler, I know he was here with us out of high school, right? And the volunteers, our coalition members, the 316 Day of Remembrance Coalition members, and kind of the staff for this. I do mind just standing up and stepping out. I know we have some of our volunteers up here. I think I should give them late night meetings and zero sleep, and I think it's because we really appreciate being in the community in moments of crisis, in moments of celebrating the victories of incredible artists that have been, representing, right, and speaking their stories in our communities in such a large scale all across the nation. But also the individual stories here that we're going to walk away remembering, right, as we're thinking the future for our Asian American community. So we just wanted to thank all of our sponsors. And I also wanted to make sure we thank our incredible volunteers. Some of them are sitting in the back there. Today. But we just want to conclude and, just remind you, it's always with us, right? And that this isn't a one-time, one moment type of opportunity for our communities, but this is a commitment to making sure that we work with community for justice in the future of our Asian American community and other immigrant and marginalized communities. So thank you again for coming, but we want to make sure we do a group photo with those who are in the room, especially volunteers and coalition members and our media presence. So we're going to be moving this table out. We're going to ask our volunteers and our team to move that out. And we're going to ask everyone to gather in the front with us for a group photo. Feel free to bring your poster boards. And while we're shifting, I just want to make sure I have a few flyers. So we have a concert tonight, and so no shots here, but there's a concert at the Korean American Community Center in Norcross. So please do join us there tonight at the concert. And we also have a Rising to Asian Hate one day in March free movie screening. It's at the Regal at Nutlock Crossing, and we have 185 seats. It's going to be a reception, a red carpet affair. It'll be really fun, and we hope that you can join us tomorrow with your family. But I also have some of the flyers here for our folks. Please do register, and we hope to see you tomorrow. Pass it everyone.
All right, you all know you're Asian, so we gotta take a photo in front of this, because otherwise, are we Asian? Come on, everybody come up in front of this beautiful, beautiful banner, and we can take a group photo.
And I would be remiss about thanking all of the viewers that are, dialing in via live stream. We thank you so much for following and joining us. And for those who are watching a little bit later, thank you so much. And we'll go ahead and close out the event. Thank you so much.